Hello and welcome to the third in our series of 6 weekly Widening Horizons webinars, brought to you as a collaboration between the Guild of One Name Studies and the local Population Studies Society. I'm Mike Kipling, Treasurer of the LPSS and also a member of the Guild. I'll be hosting the session today, which is the first of 3 to be presented by LPSS members. LPSS was founded in the 1960s with the purpose of promoting local history, social history, and historical demography, all in a local context. We publish the journal Local Population Studies, and from time to time, other books and edited collections. We also normally hold 2 conferences a year, usually on a particular theme related to populations in the past, at which we welcome contributions from speakers at all stages in their research. This current series of webinars replaces our autumn conference, which would have been a joint event with the Guild. All webinars in the series are being recorded, and you will be notified when the recording is available on the Guild website, which is normally after 3 to 5 days, and so hopefully by early next week. LPSS also hopes to be able to make most of them available on its website. If you have any problems with the volume during the presentation, please ensure your computer volume level is turned up, and if you have a headset, this often helps. I hope that the presentation will generate some questions. So please enter these questions in the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel or dashboard that is probably off to the right of your screen. Please do this as the presentation is going on. We will then ask them to the speaker at the end of the presentation. It's now my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Andy Hinde, who will be speaking about a new LPSS project which aims to collect parish register data in a consistent manner, convenient for local history studies. Andy has recently retired after more than 30 years at the University of Southampton, where he taught population history, demography, and a range of statistical courses. He was also a member of the Board of Examiners of the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries for 15 years. Before moving to Southampton, he had short spells at Birkbeck in London, the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and the University of Oxford. He's published around 40 articles on various aspects of population history, and also written 2 books, one on demographic methods, and the other called England's Population, A History Since the Doomsday Survey. He's the editor of Local Population Studies, our journal. In retirement, he hopes to continue research on population history and also to research and write the history of Alton in Hampshire and its surrounding area where he lives. He tells me that he also wants to improve his church organ playing. Andy, over to you.
Thank you. I hope that you can all see the slides that I've just put up there. And please, if you can't, I hope somebody will let me know immediately. I'm going to talk about creating a publicly available common format database of parish register data on baptisms, marriages and burials. It's hardly the most pithy title, but it does at least summarize what the talk will be about. I'd like to thank Mike for his introduction, the very kind words that he said, and I'd also like to acknowledge the assistance of some other people with this project and with the talk tonight. Paul Tomlin, Chris Galley of the Local Population Studies Society, and other members of the Local Population Studies Society Committee. I'm going to start by introducing the talk and telling you a little bit about what I'm going to say. I'll start by going back to something that Mike talked about, the origins of the Local Population Studies Society and the journal Local Population Studies, because the origins of the society are very closely bound up with the analysis of parish registers. I want to very briefly say what I mean by parish registers and what parish registers will be looking at in this talk. And then I want to move to look at the project itself and the database, which has two parts. First, it has a set of files of parish register data, or it will have a set of files of parish register data in aggregate form, and I'll explain a little bit about what that means later. And then a second set of files of parish register data which are based around individuals and form effectively transcripts of what is in the parish registers. So let's think about the origins of the Local Population Studies Society. We recently celebrated our 50th anniversary. We were founded in 1968, so the 50th anniversary was in 2018. And the origins really go back to a project at Cambridge run by the Cambridge Group for the History of Population and Social Structure, which involved using aggregate parish register data on baptisms, marriages and burials to reconstruct the history of England's population from 1541 to 1871. Eventually this project was published as a book written by Tony Wrigley and Roger Schofield in 1981, and the data really were that for that book were monthly totals of baptisms, marriages and burials for 404 parishes in England. And these were collected by a large group of local population historians. And the Local Population Studies Society was founded as a means of fostering communication within this group and between this group and the academics in Cambridge. The parish registers that the Cambridge group were using were those of the Church of England, and they began in 1538 when Church of England clergy were instructed to keep registers of persons baptized, married and buried. Not every parish started in 1538, but most parishes had started by about 1600. In the early years, in the early centuries, there was no common format. And the example on the right of the screen shows just one sample parish register. They were written on blank sheets of paper. There was some advice given as to what should be recorded, but parish registers varied in exactly what they recorded and in the format that was used. However, by the start of the 19th century, common forms were introduced for baptisms, marriages and burials. Most of the registers have been photographed and made available on microfilm or microfiche in county record offices, and many of them, not all, but many of them have actually been transcribed word for word verbatim into either into computer files or into bound volumes. I'll talk about those a little bit later on. So that's parish registers. I don't want to say too much more about parish registers. I think many of the people, many of you that are listening will know what a parish register is. As I said, the data for the 404 parishes that the Cambridge group used for the population history of England were monthly totals of baptisms, marriages and burials. They were put together through a process of fairly rigorous quality control. So the 404 parishes that were actually selected for the final analysis were parishes where the quality of the registers was considered to meet certain criteria. The data that were the data eventually were made available in Excel files, one for each parish, and additionally details of the characteristics of each parish were collected and made available in text files. So the Cambridge group prepared these data in the form of Excel files, one per parish, and also files of the characteristics. And we can have a look at one of these files. We look at the example of Odium in Hampshire, which is about 10 miles north of where I'm sitting now. And the screen shows the parish church of All Saints. And one of the interesting features of Odium is this pest house shown on the right, which was built in 1622, and it was built to house people with infectious diseases and to isolate them from the rest of the population. Something which one might think we can learn something in the modern age from what our ancestors did in the 17th century to control infectious disease. But if you look at the data, and here's the example of the Odium. This is the burial file from Odium. It shows the number of burials each month in Odium from 1538 to 1568 inclusive. Odium was one of the parishes which actually began in 1538, the first year that parish registers were to be kept. One of the things you might notice is that if you look at the years 1558 to 1559, you can see immediately these were years of very heavy mortality. In fact, that was the worst period for mortality in the whole of what we call the parish register era, from the 1530s right through to the 1830s. In all that 300-year period, the most serious national mortality crisis was in 1558 to 1559. It's not clear exactly what it was, but an influenza-type disease may have played some part in that crisis. The data files also contain cumulated events over decades. So, for example, the extract on the spreadsheet on the right here shows the number of marriages in Odium every decade from the 1530s to the 1830s. So you can see that in the 1540s, the second line down, there were 16 marriages in January, 13 in February, only 1 in March, 4 in April, and so on. And here you can see immediately the impact of the prohibition of marriages during Lent, which was almost total in the 1600s, but which gradually eased by 1800. In fact, arguably, it probably was total in the 1600s, because when Easter's late, you can still get March marriages, even though no marriages are allowed in Lent. Here's an example of one of the characteristics files. This again is for Odium, and it's simply a list of data extracted from various sources, which deals with the parish of Odium, looking at things like the population in 1811, the kind of farming that went on, and some of the some statistics in relation to the poor in the early 19th century. The 404 parishes that were used are not evenly distributed across England and Wales. They do cover most of the country. All counties are represented except Cornwall and Westmoreland, but there are concentrations in some counties. For example, Bedfordshire and Kent, and other counties are very sparsely represented, such as Dorset, Wiltshire, and Northamptonshire. The parishes also tend to be a bit larger in population terms than the average. Now, some years ago, local population studies received some money to make these data freely available to the general public, and we originally used CD-ROMs, which we burned on demand and distributed to people. Roger Schofield, who was one of the authors of the original project, wrote an accompanying booklet to go with the CD-ROMs called Parish Register Aggregate Analyses. This is really an obsolete means of distribution now, and we haven't been burning CDs for some years. And currently, we actually distribute the data by zipping up all the files and attaching them to email messages, or rather I zip the files up and attach them to email messages, which is also rather clunky. And so it was thought that one way we could fulfill our obligation to distribute these files was to construct, well, to either use the Local Population Studies Society website or to construct a website which would house and allow anyone to download these files for the 404 parishes. We did think we could use the Local Population Studies Society website, but it does require somebody to curate this. And our website curator is doing the job part-time and already has many other responsibilities. And so At the moment, we have gone down the road of seeking to construct a bespoke website which will specifically house and allow these files to be downloaded. A prototype website is in existence, and I hope to have it running by the end of 2020. Unfortunately, I was somewhat delayed during the summer by this great pestilence that we are currently suffering from. The immediate impact was that the University of Southampton, where I was then working, asked me to go back to work full time, whereas before I was working 3 days a week. They seemed to believe that half the staff was about to be taken by this disease, and therefore they need to have as many people in reserve as possible to fill the gaps. Fortunately, people were not taken by the disease. Unfortunately, they found various rather tedious administrative tasks for me to do over the summer, and so I wasn't able to devote much attention to this project. Fortunately, I've now retired, and so starting tomorrow, actually, I shall be working on developing and expanding this website. The second and third aims of this part of the project were to prepare a second edition of the booklet Parish Register Aggregate Analyses, which was originally published in 1998. A lot of work on parish registers has been done since then, and so part of the project was to prepare a second edition. That's actually completed, and the second edition is available in an electronic form. Thirdly, we wanted to prepare a list of the years and the parishes for which these aggregate data are available, and that's also completed. There was a list of the parishes, but actually the list of the years for which the series run, which differ from parish to parish, that was not available, but is now. And there's the second edition of, or the cover of the second edition of Parish Register Aggregate Analyses. It will be uploaded to the new website by the end of 2020, although a PDF of it, I can happily send people a PDF of it if you want. We're not currently planning to print hard copies, but we may print some if there's a demand for them. And just to give you an idea of the contents of the summary list of parishes and start and end dates of the series, there's an extract starting with the parish Abinger in Surrey. The parishes are in alphabetical order, giving the population in 1811 and the start and end date of the series of baptisms, burials and marriages. You can see that most of them start sometime in the 16th century, but not all in 1538. And the end of the series is typically either 1812 or 1837. 1812 because that was when a new format was introduced for the entry of baptisms, burials and marriages into the registers, and so typically a register ends and a new register was started in 1812 in many cases. Others end in 1837 or 1839, close to the time when civil registration was introduced. Now, there are data on these monthly totals available for many more parishes than the 404 used by the Cambridge group. Actually, a lot of these are available online, although more are available for annual totals rather than monthly totals. Potentially, we could add these to the database subject to quality control, and provided that we can be sure that the quality is acceptable, we can add other parishes to the database, and we'll be quite happy to do so. We know that there are about 150 additional parishes because they were used by an economic historian, Anne Cusmall, in an analysis of agrarian change. And so part of the project then, extra aims of the project are to assemble a list and to extract monthly data of other parishes and to try to augment the aggregate database with data for these parishes as we go along. Okay, now, so far, all the data I've mentioned are aggregate. They're monthly totals of baptisms, marriages, burials. There's no names, there's no other details included. Despite this, many topics could be studied. For example, the seasonality of births and marriages and their relationship to the local economy, the evolution of epidemics and the spread of epidemics from place to place. And we have a nice example of the first of these in a recent PhD thesis of Sue Jones, who is a member of the Local Population Studies Society committee, looking at marriage patterns and the local economy of Surrey. So there are lots of topics you can study, even using aggregate data. But perhaps of more interest to many of you might be the possibility of data files containing transcripts of the information that was in the registers actually as it was written. And so I want to talk for the rest of this evening about these transcripts and the possibility of augmenting the database to include these transcripts. Now, many of you will know, most of you will know that there are innumerable transcripts of parish registers that have been put together over the years. You've probably transcribed some yourselves. The transcripts are, however, not stored in any consistent way. They're in a range of locations. They're in county record offices. Often they're only in hard copies. For example, if you go to Winchester and go to the Hampshire record office in Winchester, as you go into the search room, on the right-hand side, there are some shelves, and on these shelves are a load of brown bound volumes. They contain transcripts, usually typescripts or carbon copies of typescripts of parish registers. Some are held by family history societies. Many family history societies have collections of these transcripts. Some are held in files on the computers of individual family and local historians, including, I'm sure, members of the LPSS and the Guild of One Name Studies. Others are held by institutions like the Cambridge Group for the History of Population Social Structure, including family reconstitution data for 26 parishes, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, which they use to write another book about England's population history. The format of these transcripts varies enormously, and the quality also probably varies, although many are very, very good. Many are very accurate. Nevertheless, the quality probably does vary to some extent. Here's a couple of examples of transcripts. These are from the Hampshire Record Office. They are for two parishes, East Weldham and West Weldham, which are also fairly close to where I'm sitting this evening. On the left, we have the baptisms from East Weldham from 1705 to 1717, and you can see that the entries are pretty brief. That what you get is a year, you get the name of the baptized child, typically a child, Anne Draper in the first entry, daughter of Roland and Elizabeth, baptized the 15th of June, and then Varundale Anne, daughter of John and Elizabeth, baptized 27th of August. So that's a kind of transcript that is available. That is from one of these bound volumes. This is a photograph of something that's in one of these bound volumes in the Hampshire Record Office. On the right is a transcript of the burial register from West Weldham, and again this shows a much more detailed collection of information and reinforces the idea that in these early centuries of the parish register period you didn't get a consistent level of detail. So in West Weldham we have in 1653 Julia Dunce, who was buried on the 16th of December. She was married twice, first to a chap called Jonathan, and then afterwards to William Stint. And she held some land, and the land was inherited by Richard Dunce, her son. So we know a little bit about her first husband and also the name of her son. And then finally, lower down on 1657, we have the sad tale of Mary Boyes, who was troubled with a disease commonly called the King's Evil. And she was touched by King Charles I when he was at Hampton Court in 1647. It looks like he gave her some Maundy money, what would now be the equivalent of Maundy money at that time. Shortly afterwards, she recovered and she continued for 2 years, but After that, she stopped wearing round her neck the money which was given her at the time when the king touched her, and sadly the disease broke out again, and this time there was no cure, and so she died sadly and was buried. So you've got a lot of information in this particular register. The transcripts, I've said, are in lots of different locations. Not everybody that has a transcript or owns one or is responsible for one wants to make it publicly available. Not everybody, certainly not everybody, is obliged to, but some people might be happy to make them available to a wider audience, and we know that some would be prepared to do that. And indeed, there have been attempts to assemble sets of transcripts. Recently, the Cambridge group have tried to, well, have succeeded in persuading family history societies to send them transcripts of burial registers. They are not for general dissemination. They are part of a project on mortality that the Cambridge group are working on. But they've had extreme difficulties in analysing these, because every county family history society seems to use a different format, and many use several different formats. And also, the sets of transcripts are often partial because they've been assembled for specific purposes. In the case of this project, it's about mortality. And so it's unlikely that maybe marriage registers or baptism registers will be of much use as burial registers. Some of the transcripts that are around are held in formats that are not easy for non-professional historians to use. For example, the Cambridge Group's family reconstitution data for 26 parishes are held in something called an intermediate data structure. And in order to use them, you have to know what the intermediate data structure is, and you need specialist software to try and put them into some usable format. So not very friendly, really, for the general public, amateur historians and others that might want to look at the parish registers of a particular place. And so it was thought that, given that we in the Local Population Studies Society were going to be disseminating the aggregate data anyway, we might want to expand the database to include transcripts of parish registers in a common format, and also to write a guide to the transcripts to make them easy to use. The idea was these would be publicly available, these transcripts. We would put them on the website, anybody could come and download them, and there'd be a guide to make them easy to use. We accept that not everybody that's done a transcript will want to do this, but some people may be happy and prepared to do this, and we would provide a site and a place where they could disseminate these transcripts. And we would also try to devise a common format so that as we build up the database, the transcripts are comparable and comparative analyses can be done easily. Well, one question which I wrestled with when this was first suggested was, why would we want to do this? What is the value added by expanding our database in this way? Are there actually groups of people, local historians, that aren't well served by existing provision? Are there interesting questions that could be answered using data from this new database? Is it, in other words, worth doing? It might be interesting to do it, and a way of occupying time in one's retirement, to change from growing tomatoes. But what is it actually going to be useful to people? And I began to think about the potential groups who might want to use parish register data. And I made a list, and I found six groups that I thought I could identify. First of all, there are the largest group, the family historians looking for their ancestors. And I think these are people who are already well served by organisations like Ancestry and Find My Past. I don't think we would add any value for these people. There are, of course, the Guild of One Name Studies. Now, I know that the Guild of One Name Studies has databases, I don't know what other provision it's got. I know there's a lot of data sharing goes on. You'll be able to tell me more about, or tell us more about that. And it may be that some value might be added by this kind of a database, but I'm not. I don't know how much that would be. One place studies. There are groups which are groups of one place studies or historians that are studying particular places. It seemed to me that if you're only really interested in one place, then the format of the transcript may not matter so much. And unless we have a transcript of the place you're interested in, it's not likely that we'll add a great deal of value. The fourth group were local historians who wanted to undertake comparative local studies to study aspects of the history of particular localities. They might want to compare the history, say, of two towns in Hampshire, like Alton and Basingstoke. And the existing transcripts don't serve these people very well. You can find transcripts, for example, of Alton and Basingstoke in the Hampshire Record Office, but they're in quite different formats. They're not electronically readable, and therefore comparative studies are rather difficult. And so it did seem that there was some value to be added by putting together data in a consistent format, data that are already transcribed for this kind of study. There are then groups of historians who study general topics that are best approached using local data. And what I mean here is we take a general topic. It might be, for example, smallpox epidemics in the 18th century. Now, there are a lot of data in parish registers about smallpox epidemics, and many of the parish registers identify smallpox deaths. They distinguish them from other deaths. And so it is possible to look at the particular individuals who died from smallpox month by month, and to look at things like smallpox transmission in families. And there are studies that have done this. Rosemary Leadbeater has written a very good study of Oxfordshire, which was published in Local Population Studies a couple of years ago. But historians wanting to study those topics are not currently served very well by the existence of transcripts. It would be good to have data in a consistent format for these kind of comparative studies. Finally, there are historians who are using local data to test general propositions at the national level. The Cambridge group is the best example in England. My view is that these people are mainly professional academics. They have access to lots of software and IT people. Generally speaking, they're using parish register data instrumentally. The local aspect isn't critical to what they're doing. They want parish register data in order to test general propositions about fertility change at the national level. So it seemed to me that it was the fourth and fifth groups that probably would benefit most from this collection of transcripts as it was built up over the years. And therefore, it did seem that it was probably worth doing, and therefore we should pursue this. So the idea is that the transcript data would be assembled gradually, probably building over 10 or 15 years. This is a long-run project and will start fairly small, and let's hope that we can build up these data as time goes on. The key features of the database are going to be that it's free access to anyone who's interested. There's no hoops to jump through. There's a common format to the data. We'd have the parish registers information transcribed but stored in some widely used medium, Excel probably. So you don't need specialist software. And then there'd be a provision of a written guide to the format and to the data. And so far, we've been focusing on devising a common format for the data in Excel. We've started this common work on a common format using some examples from Derbyshire, which Paul Tomlin has worked on. We're not, I don't think we finally settled on a format, but we have made substantial progress. And this just gives you an example of it's very difficult to see, but because there's a lot of data in parish registers, but this is an example of a transcript file for a parish, Somersall Herbert in Derbyshire, which has been prepared by Paul Tomlin, and actually deals with the extracts from baptism, marriage and burial files for the 1530s and 1540s. I don't want to go into the details of this Excel file. It looks quite complicated. It does enable the baptisms, the marriages and the burials to actually be put into one file, but it also allows the baptisms and the burials and the marriages to be separated if you wish to do that. It also gives the surnames quite prominence so that it's easy to search for surnames. So that's where we are with the sample transcript file. It's not in its final form, and we'd welcome any comments and suggestions as to what kind of facilities, what kind of analyses people might want to do on these files so that we can make the file as convenient as possible. The kind of topics that might be studied using the transcripts, in addition to looking at the history of a particular place and looking at the individuals that lived there, you can study infant mortality, you can study the history of epidemics, you can study marriage patterns, and of course you can link the parish register data to other nominative sources, such as settlement examinations, apprenticeship indentures, lists of inhabitants where they exist, and these bring other topics into play, possibly migration, possibly the link between poverty and marriage and so forth. So there are lots of topics that one might want to study using the transcripts. And I just wanted to show you a recent example going back to smallpox epidemics in 2 towns in Hampshire, just to show you the value of some of these transcripts. I ran a course in Southampton in population history, and as part of the course, which was for final year undergraduates, I used to take them to the record office in Winchester and show them some parish register transcripts and some original or some microfilms of original registers. And then I asked them to develop a small project based on some of the sources. And one group of students looked for smallpox epidemics in the 18th century, and they found smallpox epidemics in Basingstoke and in Ringwood. These were found in the transcripts, and they then transcribed the relevant years' records from these towns and produced some analysis of the smallpox epidemics in these 2 towns. And you can see that both towns had more than one smallpox epidemic, and some of these were pretty serious. Basingstoke in 1741, the crude death rate per 1,000 was 130 or so. That is about 13% of the population died in that epidemic, in that 1 year. And the other thing you can do is actually look at the progress of the epidemics through the towns. And this graph shows the cumulative proportion of smallpox deaths in the epidemics. The solid lines to the left are Basingstoke, and the dotted lines or dashed lines are Ringwood. And one thing which intrigued me when I plotted these is that the epidemic seems to have gone through more quickly in Basingstoke than in Ringwood. It took about 6 months for all the deaths from smallpox to take place in Basingstoke. In Ringwood, it tended to take about 10 or 11 months and that was true of all the 3 epidemics in Ringwood. The Basingstoke epidemics were through the population more quickly. Now, I don't know why that was. Maybe the people in Ringwood practiced social distancing better than the people in Basingstoke. I don't know. Maybe it was something to do with the geography of Basingstoke relative to Ringwood, or the household size and structure in the different places. In order to study that, you'd actually need to go back to the transcripts and have a look at who died, and even perhaps where these whether the transmission was in families and to the extent to which those who died were in the same families. But it raises interesting questions. So the plan of the transcript database is that it will be a kind of what we call a bottom-up enterprise. It will be local and family historians from the Local Population Studies Society and others, for example, members of the Guild of One Name Studies. We can develop the format of the transcripts, and we can change as needed or requested. We're not trying to be comprehensive, but to provide a selection of transcripts which could be used for comparative analyses. We're interested in publicising the idea of the database, both to people who might supply transcripts that already have them, that would be prepared to make them publicly available, and also to people who might want to use them to analyse particular topics. I would say if over 15 years, that'll be probably as long as I am sort of compos mentis enough to do academic or research, given my current age. If we get transcripts for 404 parishes over 15 years, this will be a great success. So if we can match the aggregate database, that would be wonderful. But I would think it would be a gradual process of building up transcripts and putting them into a common format over the years. So I think we've come to the end. Work is still at an early stage, so there's the opportunity to influence the direction of the project, which is why it's a good time to give a talk like this. We certainly don't want to duplicate work that's already being done or databases that are already in the public domain. We recognise that only a small minority of family and local historians may be interested in contributing to or using the database, but we're aware that there are very many family and local historians, and even if only half of 1% are interested, that's still a substantial number of several hundred, which makes a critical mass which might want to use the database. So I'd like to open the session to questions and comments. Thank you for listening, and I hope that I haven't gone on longer than my allotted time. Finally, just for those of you that want to follow things up, there is a reference to the paper on the Cambridge Group Family Reconstitutions, which is publicly available, and there's a reference to Wrigley and Schofield's book, in which they used the data for the 404 parishes. Okay, I'm going to stop now, and I don't know quite what happens now, but I'm going to.
Yeah, Andy, can I first of all thank you for a most interesting presentation. I think you've illustrated what can be done by harnessing the mass powers of local historians, local volunteers, and what I think all hope can be done again in response to your challenge. Now, there have been a number of questions, I think, and we should see them coming up shortly. Yes, I hope so, in which case I was going to ask them in what remains of the allotted hour to ask them to you. And if there are any that we don't have time to answer during the session, then I know they're going to be sent to you afterwards, Andy, so that you can hopefully provide written replies to them, which are going to be posted up on the Guild's website.
Yes, that'd be fine. I hope you can hear me and see me.
I certainly can. So either just the two of us having a conversation, or the whole world can hear us, hopefully.
Okay, right.
I think we may be going to get the questions in a second. Can I just ask you one first of all, which is, would you be happy to make your slides available on the Guild website and maybe the LPSS website as well afterwards?
Oh yes, no problem with that. Yes, please do post them if they'll be interesting. Yes, Yes, that's no problem.
Okay, so
like
we're waiting the first question, I think. While that's coming, I'll just ask you another one, Andy. You mentioned the commercial websites such as Find My Past and Ancestry. Obviously, they've done quite a lot of transcription work as well, which is electronic. Is there any possibility of being able to approach them and asking them to have access to what they've already done, or even so the Latter-day Saints or somebody like that?
Yeah, I think there might be. I mean, it's difficult with Find My Past and Ancestry are commercial organisations, and therefore we'd have to negotiate quite delicately in order to persuade them to give up their data. I know that Find My Past did did provide the individual level census data for the 19th century, and that was part of a project, the Integrated Census Microdata Project, and they did negotiate access to those, or they did negotiate the transfer of data from Find My Past. It was quite a delicate negotiation, and so and of course they had quite a lot of money at their disposal, which we don't have. So I'm not sure quite how easy that would be. I do know that when the Cambridge group have more recently been interested in mortality data, they didn't go to Find My Past or Ancestry. They went to the family history societies, and it may be that was because Find My Past and Ancestry wanted more money but they didn't have. I don't know. I'd have to talk to them about that.
Yes. Now, I very briefly saw about 6 questions. Here we are. So the first question is, will there be a handout from the webinar, which I think is more or less the question I've already asked you, that will make your slides available?
I can make the slides available as an electronic presentation, but I can print them to a PDF file and make them available in that way as well. People can take them away. People can have them, download them as a PDF file.
Okay, we can work out how that's to be done after that. Yeah, let's just have a look at the Guild website, and I'm sure they'll be available somewhere. So the second question is, where can we find a list of the parishes in the project?
Right, the list of the 404 parishes in the project was, well, it's published in several places. You can find a list in the book by Wrigley and Schofield that was published in 1981, but you can also find a list in the booklet which was written by Roger Schofield and published in 1998, or you can find a list. I have an Excel file which is the Excel file that contains a start and end date to the series. That contains a list of all the parishes, or in the PDF file of the second edition of the booklet. And we're happy to make this available to anyone. So I mean, I can send you a copy of that booklet, and if that can be posted on the website of the Guild of Modern Name Studies. I don't see there's any issue with that. So yes, we can provide that. So there are several.
I think that would be a good idea. If the Guild can make it available, that would be an excellent idea. Yeah.
I mean, I don't see there's a problem. I don't see there's a problem with making it available in that way. We originally disseminated it. We charged £5, but that was for the cost of a CD, actually, originally. So we don't do that anymore. So I think the local population study society has been given money, and we have an obligation to make this information as widely publicised as possible.
Sure. So the third question is, how can we see data on a particular parish? I guess I can't quite see that. It's on a particular parish we may have interest in. The population numbers would be really interesting for local historians.
Yeah, it depends what you mean by population numbers, one of the problems that you've got the numbers of baptisms, marriages and burials for that parish, if it's part of the 404 parishes, and if it's not in the 404 parishes, it may be that we can add to it'll be one of the parishes we add to the database. The data in the aggregate files is just numbers of baptisms, marriages and burials. It's not population totals, and this is actually one of the biggest difficulties with using them. It's in fact one of the biggest difficulties with population history in general, in that we don't know before 1801 what the population of a parish was really. We don't have any information, any reliable information at the local level. So there are data, you can get population totals for individual parishes, but you have to get them from a range of different sources, such as bishops' visitations and ecclesiastical censuses and so forth. But the burial, marriage and baptism totals, there'll be, if the parish you're interested in is one of the 404 parishes, then you can get it. You can download it. You will be able to download it. And actually, if you want a particular parish and it's one of the 404, excuse me, I can send you the Excel file. But they don't have population totals in. You'd have to augment the population totals by your own research. And that's quite.
That was more quickly in Schofield. It wasn't in their book. I mean, they used the 404 parish data to make estimates of the population of the country and how it changed over the years.
They use the 404 parishes to make estimates of the population of the whole country, and I guess they were making assumptions that there was some kind of averaging out. What you can't conclude is that the national population trends that they produce will necessarily apply to every parish, and that's the problem. Yeah. So different parishes will have had different patterns, and so if you're interested in a particular parish, that might have had quite a different evolution to the national pattern, and you can't get the total population for that parish.
Yes, one thing Wrigley and Schofield found, right, they didn't use any parishes in big towns, did they? Or very few in big towns, or none in London. Is that right?
There are no London parishes. There are some parishes in Norwich, in Ipswich, Shrewsbury. There are one or two Lancashire parishes which became quite large towns, Rochdale, for example, but were not originally large towns. The parishes were bigger than average. They didn't tend to use very small rural parishes, partly because they had very few baptisms, marriages, and burials, and they actually needed a lot of events. They needed a lot of burials, so in order to do the national analysis. So there are a few small parishes.
Excellent, thanks. Can we move on to the next question? Right. Okay. So someone says here, I'm interested in technical setup of the database. What format is it held in? And will there be a website with downloadable spreadsheets? So for some reason I can't read the whole of these slides. I'm missing the right-hand side of it.
The plan is, and I've started work on this, it is going to be as simple as possible. So at the moment, the database consists of, for the numbers of baptisms, marriages and burials, but also the transcripts will be, I think, in the same format, in the same basic technical structure. That at the moment, if you want the files, they are simply zipped up. There are 404 Excel files. They're arranged in folders, one per county. So there are about 40 odd folders, and they're all zipped up and sent off. The spreadsheet, each there's one spreadsheet per parish, so that and the spreadsheet has about 10 worksheets. One is a worksheet for baptisms, a worksheet for marriages, a worksheet for burials, and there are various worksheets with these aggregated decadal and totals, and even over half centuries. So there's one spreadsheet per parish. What I am hoping to do is to make it more on the website is to make it possible to download just one of these spreadsheets at once. So if you want just one parish, you can get just one parish, but also to make it relatively straightforward to download groups. So if you want all the parishes in a county, you can get those. And if you want the whole thing, you can get the whole thing if you want. So I'm hoping that's the way we're going to do it. But I do want it to be possible to download one parish, because many people will only want one parish, the particular place that they're interested in. And the same is true of transcripts. We'll do it parish by parish, but with the possibility in the end of aggregating, of downloading groups of parishes. I hope that answers the question. I'm not a very technically minded with respect to the design of these websites, but what I'm interested in is making them user friendly for people like me who aren't very technically minded.
Okay, question 5. I have only 32,000 Fowler births presumably people call Fowler, 1837 to 1915. Does your study use the information recently revealed by the GRO? I estimate the GRO are missing about 1% of those available on free BMD/Ancestry.
The project we're looking at doesn't use information from the General Registry Office. The data come from the Church of England registers of baptisms, marriages, and burials, and so they don't. Well, in the period beyond or after civil registration started in 1837, the parish registers don't necessarily capture all the births. So you might find that the parish register would have births that don't appear in the General Registry Office's list, but it's relatively unlikely. The period for which our data would be most useful is a period before 1837, where there is no registration of births, and the registration of baptisms is all that we have. So we're not planning to cover much past 1837, although if a particular transcript takes us forward into the early 20th century, we won't deliberately cut it off in 1837 and refuse to have anything to do with the period after that. We put in the full transcript. And there are parishes where the records of burials and baptisms are very good at records of births and deaths. There are some parishes, particularly in rural areas in, say, central southern England, where adherence to the Church of England was pretty universal right the way through until 1900.
But you may well be missing Quakers and others, of course, in various parishes.
We would miss. Yeah, there are Quakers. We're not at present thinking of extending this to Quakers, other non-conformists registers. I mean, one could do that, and it's actually a job that needs doing, because there are more of these registers than many people think, and therefore one could do that. We're not at the moment thinking of doing.
Okay, thanks. Very quickly then, we've got one. This will have to be our last question. Have you spoken to the people who run the Free Reg website? Catherine Ryan and others said that they've transcribed parish registers for them, and they are already in a common format and checked. That sounds like a possible source of data.
I think we should. We haven't yet spoken to the Free Reg people, and it's something that we need to do before we actually proceed with the transcripts, because it is possible that we can liaise with the Free Reg people. And as you say, their transcripts are already in a common format. What we would need to look at is whether the common format that they had prepared is useful for the constituency we're mainly aiming at, which is local historians who might want to do comparative studies of their local communities. But it's something that we should do, and that would be part of our work on devising a useful format in which to put our database.
Okay, thanks, Andy. That I think is all the questions we've got time for. If there were any others, then as I said earlier, they'll be sent to Andy to answer afterwards.
Well,
we hope you find the webinar informative and enjoyable, and that you'll want to join all 3 remaining webinars in the series. Registration is already open for all of these, the next one being a week from today on Wednesday, October 28th at 8 p.m. Non-UK viewers, please note that the UK reverts to Greenwich Mean Time between now and then. So at the next talk, Dr. Nikki Brown will be speaking about another example of people working together collaboratively, the Ruby One Name Collaborative Study, how it worked and what I learned. Hope to see you at that. Before we end, I'd just like to thank all of those in the Guild seminar and marketing team who've so ably organised the technical side of the seminar, the whole series and tonight's presentation. As you exit the webinar, there'll be a feedback survey, and we'd be very grateful if you could take a few minutes to complete this, as all your comments can help shape the future webinars we plan until we can hopefully once again meet in person, both the Guild and LPSS. So finally, on behalf of LPSS and the Guild, thank you for participating, and good night.
Right.